The Dolphins 2026 draft class is complete, and there were signs. Did you catch them? I pulled some of them together. We'll look over them here on today's show.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, NFL staff writer for A to Z Sports. Special welcome to each and every one of you the week after the 2026 NFL Draft, and we're getting into it. We're going to look at this class as a whole, and I collected a dozen quotes from coaches, coordinators, general manager throughout the pre-draft process from the time that Jon-Eric Sullivan was hired in the middle of January until Thursday night. Quotes that embody the picks that the Dolphins made. And I've got a dozen quotes. So we're going to first acknowledge this whole class. There are a couple of UDFAs that we'll talk about a little later in the week that I think are really compelling names, but they aren't a part of, obviously, the Baker's dozen of draft picks that the Dolphins made. And then we'll go player by player and acknowledge the quote that I found that I thought best embodied why the decision was made for this team to draft this player. So the class as a whole, number 12 overall, Kadyn Proctor, Alabama Crimson Tide, offensive tackle. Number 27 overall, Chris Johnson, cornerback, San Diego State. 43 overall, Jacob Rodriguez, linebacker, Texas Tech. 75, Caleb Douglas, Texas Tech, wide receiver. 87, tight end, Will Kazmarek, Ohio State Buckeyes. 94 overall, wide receiver, Chris Bell, Louisville Cardinals. 130 overall, edge, Trey Moore, Texas Longhorns. 138 overall, Kyle Lewis, linebacker / defensive weapon, Pitt Panthers. Michael Taft, safety, Texas Longhorns, 158. Kevin Coleman Jr., 177 overall, slot receiver. Seydou Traore, tight end, Mississippi State, 180. DJ Campbell, offensive guard, 200. 238, Max Llewellyn, Iowa Hawkeyes. So we're going to go right back down this list, one player at a time with the quotes. The first one comes from Jeff Hafley on January 22nd. 2026, the introductory press conference that he and Jon-Eric Sullivan had, and he was asked about his core beliefs. And here's the quote. And then you apply it to Kadyn Proctor as a football player, and you'll understand very quickly why they became so enamored with Kadyn Proctor, and he was the choice. There are certain core beliefs that I really do believe in, like running the ball and being really physical up front. So when they know we're going to run the ball, we're still going to run it well. Is there any question? That quote, going back and finding that quote, you don't read that and then look at the selection of Kadyn Proctor and say, well, yeah, I guess, like, that's the psychology of the pick, right? And I think that's a welcomed change. And, me assessing this draft class, it wasn't where did I have the players graded versus where they got picked. It was more of what did they say they wanted to be? What did they say they wanted to achieve in the buildup? And then did they achieve those things with their picks? And that's where it was helpful for me to review a bunch of quotes and sound bites and snippets and snapshots of football psychology and ideology and who they want to be across a 3-month period of time. You'd have a really hard time if I said pick any player in this year's class to embody. I really do believe in running the ball and being really physical up front. So when they know we're going to run the ball, we're still going to run it well. What other names come to top of mind for offensive linemen in this class, if not Kadyn Proctor, in that regard, right? So it helps explain why they end up coveting him the way that they do. I want to give credit to ESPN's Marcel Louis-Jacques, who took a quote that Hafley had at the owners' meetings and asked Coach Hafley to revisit it. on Saturday afternoon after day 3 had culminated. Because Jeff Hafley talked at the owners' meetings about the 3 levels of a defense and evaluating a corner and saying guys that can win inside the contact window at the line of scrimmage, guys that can win in the intermediate area, and the guys that can win vertically down the field. And the more boxes you check out of those 3 layers, the more it gives us from a coverage standpoint and the more we can do. And if it becomes more narrow, the things that a player can do, then we have to set our coverages and our identity off of which 2 of those boxes do they check. And if they're checking one or none of the boxes, then we probably need to find somebody else to play. Right? That's paraphrasing what Jeff Hafley said at the league meetings. Marcel asked Hafley on Saturday how Chris Johnson fit into that calculus, and he said, I think he can win on all 3 levels. And he can take the ball away, and he tackles, and he's aggressive. That level, Hafley said the guys that check all 3 boxes are guys that have a chance to be really special players. And I'm not saying that Chris Johnson's going to be a very special player, but if Hafley believes that about Chris Johnson, and he has that level of conviction in him, and he called him one of his favorite players in the draft, and the criteria that that he's grading on the corners is how they handle all 3 of those levels of the field. And if Hafley thinks they do them all, and that's the recipe in the DNA for the guys who end up being special players, that's pretty insightful why the team is willing to move up at the end of the first round to ensure that they get Chris Johnson with the pick swap with the 49ers. I mean, they weren't just invested with a late first round pick. They had more invested because it was 40-something spots from the end of day 2 to beginning of day 3, which ended up being the Kyle Lewis pick. You did pretty well. But the conviction there really helps to explain, in my opinion, where Chris Johnson became such an open and shut conversation for them is what it sounded like. Now we got Jacob Rodriguez next, and man, there was some really strong language about the kind of leader that they believe Jacob Rodriguez is going to be, and that's what brought me to the quote from Jon-Eric Sullivan. The toughness and the kind of attitude and competitive atmosphere that Jeff Hafley will bring to this football team will speak for itself as we move down the road. Rodriguez is like, there's no off switch kind of player. Right. And he was referred to this past weekend as a flag bearer of what they want to be as a franchise. There's another quote we'll get into, and it also applies to Jacob Rodriguez, but I wanted to save it for Kyle Lewis because I thought it was especially like football X's and O's pertinent to kind of the overall theme of what they did on the second level of the defense this past weekend. So there's some scheme stuff that I think applies to the Rodriguez pick as well, but just knowing how Rodriguez was regarded out of Texas Tech as the culture guy, and to hear them after he was picked be called a flag bearer, right? Like, that's a very strong endorsement of what they think he is going to serve as. And Sully called him a future green dot player, right? Like they believe future quarterback of our defense is what they believe. And they are so dialed on the competitive atmosphere. And this pick really embodies that too, because you had Jordan Brooks, you had Tyrell Dotson, you had a top 50 pick, and you still chose to invest it in this player. Like you put Tyrell Dotson on notice. You've given yourself some flexibility with what things look like for Jordan Brooks, but like by and large, you had a lot more pressing needs than stack linebacker. But this is a pick, and it also falls in line with that. We really believe in letting the board speak to us and how we value the players up on the board. You're not going shopping for a grocery list. You're getting the best assets that you can find. And they felt Jacob Rodriguez at this point was one of those. And part of that calculus, obviously, the culture that they think he can help to bring. We'll go the trio of skill players on day 2 next with Caleb Douglas, Will Kazmarek, and Chris Bell. That's on the other side of the break. Make sure you guys stick with us. NFL Draft is here where preparation meets opportunity and every decision matters. It's all about being ready when your moment comes. That same mindset applies off the field too, and that's where Regiet comes in. Regiet offers treatments designed to help you feel ready and confident when it matters most. Their top option, Regiet Ready, is a mint that dissolves under your tongue with clinically proven ingredients, and it works quickly, often in about 15 minutes, and can last for up to 36 hours. They also offer Go Long, designed to help with both performance and control. It's all about showing up at your best whenever your moment is. Head to Regiet.com/LockedOnNFL. Get 15% off your ED treatment. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnNFL for 15% off Regiet Performance Medicine for men. This is also your invitation to check out the Everydayer Club here on the Locked On Network, where you get ad-free episodes of the program and access to the Locked On Community Discord, where you can join other listeners of this program, talk about the Dolphins draft class, and more. Tap the link in the show notes below. The Caleb Douglas pick, and it was reported Barry Jackson last night. I think it was last night. Did report that the Dolphins were reportedly interested in Malachi Fields. And it seems as though they may have got sniped on that one, where the Giants jumped up and gave 2 extra picks away to do a deal with whoever was sitting at 74 to come up and get Malachi Fields, the wide receiver from Notre Dame, who would have been the 6'4", 220-pound, like monster X, developmental X receiver who doesn't necessarily have blazing speed, but can really be a bully at the catch point and help you in the run game. Instead, they go Caleb Douglas, who they're obviously higher than consensus on. And here's the quote. It's from Jon-Eric Sullivan at the NFL Combine. This was the clue, right? As we're assembling the clues that kind of speak to all the picks and why some of these picks, part of the reason why some of these picks were made. To say we're going to have a wide receiver room of 5'9" guys would be a lie. Jon-Eric Sullivan at the local media meet and questionnaire session at the NFL Combine. Douglas is 6'3.5", 206, and has some vertical speed, right? And I don't foresee Douglas being, if you think about, and I did this video for A to Z a couple weeks ago, and it was like the difference between stereotypical X and Z receivers in the NFL. The X receivers are the guys that are big, physical, but explosive. They can play in isolation on one side of the formation, and it's mano-a-mano, and you can be a bucket getter, and you can run a bunch of routes and create a bunch of separation, and you can beat press coverage if teams are going to try to press you, because when you're on isolation on one side of the formation, you're on the line of scrimmage. So you have less wiggle room to be able to release off the ball and not be disrupted by timing, right? I don't think Douglas is that kind of player. I think he's a little bit more of the big-bodied vertical Z, which is because he's more of an angular guy, right? Like he's not like a big rocked-up receiver like a Chris Bell who's 220. And I think Chris Bell probably you can work on as a developmental X and probably get him a lot of time in the slot where like you're a little closer to the core. You can be a little bit more involved in the blocking for the run game. You can run a lot of shallow unders underneath. And settle in the soft spaces in zone, and he's big enough to be able to challenge linebackers when they step downhill and try to tackle them. Like, or if you get man coverage and you're a runaway and you turn into a locomotive on the opposite side of the formation from where you start because you're condensed in, so you get across the middle of the field fast. That's kind of the recipe for Chris Bell. I think Douglas is your angular, big-bodied down the field Z receiver, where you're running a lot of lift routes. And you have Tutu Atwell as well for that component, but it's nice to have a guy that's bigger to do that. And I think Douglas coming out of Texas Tech, that is a little bit more of a wide open passing offense. You're getting a lot of open air because of the college spread. I think you probably benefit from having him not try to run a bunch of nuanced routes to start as he comes in, but you benefit instead from having him attack on the big flies and the outside release goes and the big posts and the big corners. And if you get a one-on-one, you can kind of lay one out to him down there and know that he can run and open up his strides when he's out in the open air. And because he's to the formational strength, you give yourself a better chance to not have him jammed and pressed at the line of scrimmage, even though he's a bigger guy. I think developing that press release technique will be something they'll work on with him. Hence why I think the athletic comparable profile to Valdez-Scantling makes a lot of sense, because that's kind of what Marquez was too. But the quote, we're not going to have a wide receiver room of a bunch of 5'9" guys, would be a lie. Yeah, that's true, because you went out and you got a bunch of guys that are not 5'9". Will Kazmarek, tight end, Ohio State Buckeyes. I cheated for this one. I'm not sorry for it either. The quote comes from first-round draft pick Kadyn Proctor on Thursday night when he said, "We're going to run the blank out of the ball." The quote's out there. It's a family-friendly program. I can't say. But if you told me you're going to prioritize a draft pick at the tight end position, and Jeff Hafley's talking about, we want to run the ball when they know we got to run the ball, and we're still going to run it well because we're physical at the line of scrimmage, and we're going to be a run volume team to really try to physically dictate terms to opposing teams. Kazmarek's right up there, as he's this year's version of Jackson Hawes. Right? I know some people were surprised by the valuation, but the evaluation is right on the nose for what he does versus what they want to be versus your inline wide tight end coming into the draft was Ben Sims. And Sims, I wouldn't dismiss him as being a player on the 53 and maybe a guy that starts the season, but he has no guaranteed money in his contract. So if Kazmarek comes in and is ready to roll and blocks the way that I think he does, I think he not only uproots Ben Sims from the starting Y position, but he's got a chance to potentially, depending on what the rest of the roster shakeout looks like when you cut down, maybe push Sims off the roster in the first altogether. Chris Bell. This is from Jeff Hafley on January 22nd, that same introductory press conference with the duo atop the org. We need to build it around the quarterback. And you have to surround that quarterback with weapons, the offensive line, the wideouts, the backs, so it's not all him. Because I do like being under center, and I do like running the football, because the play pass off of that, you create separation between the second and the third level from a defensive standpoint. That's really hard. The screen game, the keepers, everything looking the same, hunting explosive. Jeff Hafley, you talk about hunting explosives. Chris Bell, explosive play receiver with the ball in his hands. And some of that quote also goes back to Rodriguez and Kyle Lewis, talking about the stress and the strain between the second and the third level of a defense, because the safety's on the back end, they got to play high. You're going to limit explosive plays. And those guys on the second level, they're the conflict defenders now, because they got to be able to step forward and fit the run, but they got to be able to get enough depth to take away the intermediate throws. And then if you get enough depth to take away the intermediate throws, then there's these routes that develop underneath your shallow crossers that you can dump down to. And a guy like Chris Bell can really be a headache to try to get into your run key, get into your zone drop, get back to trying to trigger downfield across a shallow cross across your face and try to make the tackle and avoid giving up additional yardage. That's Chris Bell. That whole DNA of second and third level conflict, and Bell is a run after catch guy with hitches and slants and shallows and intermediate crosses. Like that for me is where I see the vision for Chris Bell as being a very problematic player with his size and run after catch ability once he gets healthy. So that for me was the quote that served as the clue for Chris Bell, because as a defensive coach, Jeff Hafley identifies the challenges that come with that middle of the field area, and that's where I think Chris Bell can really shine. We'll sneak in one more. This is courtesy of Jeff Hafley at the NFL Combine. This is a quote that I think tips off why they liked Trey Moore, the linebacker hybrid rush player from Texas. I like all fronts. I think having variation is so important. You might say we're going to be a 4-3 defense, which will base out of 4-3, but I like to get into 4-3 structures and 3-4 structures all out of the same personnel grouping, so I'm not subbing. And you're saying, no, now he's in a 3-4 and summing back, and now they're in a 4-3. I think front variation is huge, and having the ability to be multiple. Trey Moore gives you that. He could be a 4-3 end. He can play off the ball to play some stack off ball linebacker. He could be a 3-4 rush linebacker. He can, to the front side of the formation, you want to kick the tackles over towards the formational strength, put his hand in the dirt. Or maybe you got somebody inside that you want to really beat up the tight end of that side. Well, then kick him back and pump the linebackers away from the formational strength and have him play Sam. Or you can go 3-4 and you can push him outside and rush him off the edge. Because again, at Texas, he had experience doing off the ball stuff to go with all of the pass rushing stuff that he did at UTSA. This is kind of the match personnel versus match situation conversation that we had the other day. That was like a popular question to ask defensive coordinators across the league midseason last year. That's what he's talking about. He doesn't want to have to change the personnel to match anything, which means you need supreme multiplicity with your football players to be able to achieve that and do that. I think Trey Moore helps with that. So does Kyle Lewis. I'll give you my Kyle Lewis quote that was the clue from Jeff Hafley for why they like Kyle Lewis on the other side of the break. Make sure you guys stick with us. Workplace chaos, deadlines stacking up, your inbox is overflowing, and the one position you have to fill is still sitting open when the pressure's on and you need the right hire. This is a job for Indeed. Sponsored Jobs. Indeed Sponsored Jobs helps you reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for, so you're not just hoping the right candidate falls into your lap. Here's a stat that says it all. In the minute that I've been talking to you, companies like yours have made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching, more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Listeners of this show get a $75 sponsored job credit to help you get the premium status your job listing deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now. Support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on the program. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions do apply. Need to hire. This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Here's the Kyle Lewis quote. 138th overall pick, 2026 NFL draft. When you look at an off-ball linebacker, remember, this is also applicable to Jacob Rodriguez, but I didn't want to double-dip quotes. When you look at an off-ball linebacker, how does he play in space? It's the first thing he mentioned is how does he play in space? How does he react to the run? But then, is he a guy that you can match up one-on-one with the backs? And he proceeded to continue onward and talk about, from a pass rush perspective and passing down perspective, blitzing as a pass rusher. But how does he play in space? You know what Kyle Lewis is? The best in-space linebacker in this year's class, bar none. So much so that he's going to be probably given the opportunity to earn reps as a nickel defender, as a big nickel as a third safety, potentially playing deeper than that. Very, very unique skill set. And Jeff Hafley, off-ball linebacker, first thing out of his mouth, how does he play in space? Rodriguez has an impact in that area of the game as well, but he ain't Kyle Lewis. Now, Rodriguez is more of a traditional stack backer than Lewis, who's a little bit more of a hybrid player. But, I mean, we're talking about a really rare coverage player with what he's physically capable of doing of taking guys down the field. More often than not, you're going to say, hey, we get a matchup with a linebacker against our tight end up the seam. Big matchup. Look to take it against man-to-man coverage. You want to do that, Kyle Lewis. Michael Taff, 158th overall pick, safety, Texas Longhorns. The quote for me, and he's going to have a chance to earn defensive opportunities because the safety room is one that I kind of expected them to draft early, and they didn't get the chance to do that. But here's what Chris Tabor had to say about kick coverage and the new kickoff rules, because I think it's pertinent to a player in Taft that has almost 850 career special team snaps. With regards to the dynamic kickoff and those types of things, you're seeing a lot of returns, which is fun, but you're seeing a lot of covered kicks. I think last year where I was at, we ended up covering over 100 kickoffs. That's a lot of opportunities for guys to play and a lot of opportunities for opponents to get big plays. I do think it's growing and gaining more attention. Well, you get a guy with 800 plus career special team snaps at Texas. I would suspect he's going to be a strong candidate for you to play a lot of special teams. I think that's his ticket to dressing on game days will be the team stuff, and I suspect that he'll do that. I've got very high expectations for Taff as a special teams guy with kind of an open-endedness about, like, we'll see how it goes on defense. 177. This is the only time I cheated. Well, unless you include the Proctor quote from Thursday night to talk about Kadyn. But it's the same quote. That quote from Chris Tabor, by the way, for special teams and kickoffs came on February 4th. The Jon-Eric Sullivan quote about the toughness and the kind of attitude and competitive atmosphere that Jeff Hafley bring to this football team will speak for itself as we move down the road. I used that one earlier with Jacob Rodriguez, but I'm using it again for Kevin Coleman, but for a different reason. It's not, wow, what a flag bearer of competitiveness for our program, but it's, think about the wide receiver room and who's back and who's the most well-entrenched guy, and it's Malik Washington as a guy who's preferably a slot option and returns kicks on special teams. You know what Kevin Coleman is? Preferably a slot option and the guy who returns kicks on special teams. So even your most safe guy in the wide receiver room just got direct competition with a 5th-round draft choice. You're going to have to come to play. Here's the quote for Seydu. And this comes from Jon-Eric Sullivan the week before the NFL draft on April 15th. It's a nice birthday present for me. Here from Sully on my birthday. I think it obviously starts with the quarterback, talking about a build for a team. I think that's universal. And then I would say probably the ability to affect the quarterback and the ability to protect the quarterback. Then I would think it's probably your playmakers and guys that can take the playmakers out of the game as far as the order of the pecking order of assembling a roster. So Seydu is the 2nd tight end the Dolphins drafted, the 5th skill player the Dolphins drafted. So they draft Kaz earlier in the draft, and Seydu still gets his name called because he has prolific passing game potential that needs to be developed. So again, you're pick 180. You've kind of been through the ringer. You just picked a receiver at 177, and you still double down, and you pick your 5th skill player and your 2nd tight end. Why? Because he has the pass game potential to positively impact the game. Our next quote is for DJ Campbell, offensive guard, Texas Longhorns. This came on February 4th, courtesy of Bobby Slowick. We'll echo the Jeff Hafley quote from the Kadyn Proctor segment. I believe in running the ball, believe strongly in running the ball. I think most of the successful teams in the NFL these days run the ball really well at a high clip and really build it from there. You've got to win in the trenches. I like keeping the defense off balance. It's probably my number one thing as far as what I look for in a play caller. So the identity element comes back to twice from these coaches in a 2-week period about running the ball and winning the trenches. Campbell's obviously is a 6th-round pick, not perceived to be a complete player, but he's played a lot of football. And the things that he has is he has length, he has heavy hands, he's got a dense body, and he's got wide edges to make you play around. And the double dip here helps you get to a group of 8 guys that I look at and say, okay, like, if this was our 1 through 8, the laundry list of things that happen, that need to happen for me to feel good about it, isn't exceptionally long. There's probably 2 things on that list. It's that Proctor comes in and hits the ground running as a positive starter for your team, wherever you choose to play him. And the other one is that Jonas Savaiinaea takes a step forward at offensive guard. If those 2 things happen, I think DJ Campbell is good enough that, like, as your 8th offensive lineman, without positional flexibility, kick outside to play tackle or to probably go inside and play center, although they said they'll give him a chance to try to do that. It gives you some good depth. And you need that good depth to bring that vision of running the ball well consistently to life, because injuries are a part of the game, unfortunately. And our last quote This one for Max Llewellyn comes in from Jeff Hafley at the NFL Combine. The edge rusher position right now, we need to fill that room up. There's not many left on the roster right now, so not many to evaluate, and obviously we have to add some depth there. He obviously says this before they add Beal and before they add Uche and before they add Ajabo to the mix and before they add Trey Moore to the mix in the draft. But Llewellyn is a little bit of a different kind of player from every single one of those guys, and getting a skill-specific player who is a little bit more heavy to kind of serve a rotational role or have a chance to earn serving a rotational role, I think makes plenty of sense, and they were readily willing to acknowledge that they needed a lot to invest at the edge position. That's going to do it for us here today on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. Dozen quotes for 13 picks. The clues that were there about why each one of these players mattered to the Dolphins. At least how I interpret it from the outside looking in. That's going to do it. We are out of here, Kyle Krabs. Keep it locked in here, Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. Make it a great rest of your Monday, and I will talk to you all again soon. Fins up.